For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. The Pacific Coast Trail remains a wilderness trail with real risk. The elements can be harsh and know no boundaries or show no mercy. Please click the subscribe and like buttons. This is Outdoor Disasters. The Pacific Crest Trail is a long-distance hiking and equestrian trail closely aligned with the highest portion of the Cascade and Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. The trail's southern terminus is next to the Mexico-United States border just south of Campo, California, and its northern terminus is on the Canada-US border and passes through the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. The Pacific Crest Trail is 2,653 miles long and ranges in elevation from roughly 110 feet above sea level near the Bridge of the Gods on the Oregon-Washington border to 13,153 feet at Forester Pass in the Sierra Nevada. The route passes through 25 national forests and 7 national parks. John Joseph Donovan, 59, was hiking near Southern California's Mount San Jacinto on May 6, 2005. That day, a blizzard dropped 8 inches of snow and he was trapped on the mountain. No one will ever be sure how John Donovan spent his last days on Earth. What is nearly certain is that on May 6, 2005, as a blizzard dumped 8 inches of snow on Southern California's Mount San Jacinto, Donovan was trapped on the flanks of the 10,834-foot peak under an ocean of blinding whiteness. At the time, he was just 5 days shy of his 60th birthday. He had an enlarged heart, which made breathing and often even thinking clearly difficult. He was lost and alone. A veteran hiker who was nonetheless a notoriously bad navigator, Donovan had strayed from the Pacific Crest Trail, which he was through hiking. He carried no useful maps nor a compass. He was traveling ultralight, using a tarp in lieu of a tent and socks in place of gloves, and he had few provisions. And he'd headed into the storm on one of the most rugged wilderness trails in the world. Around 1 p.m. on May 3rd, he climbed into Little Tahquitz Valley, just south of Saddle Junction, and found that the trail was now concealed by snow. John sought help from 2 other hikers, a Canadian nurse named Connie Davis, 46, and her 20-year-old son, Alex, both of whom had extensive altitude experience. When Donovan began following the Davises through the snowfield, Connie told him, "We're not going to take the most direct route." He stayed about 30 feet behind them and put on crampons. But the spikes didn't work well with his lightweight trail runners, and he slipped and fell repeatedly. Eventually, Connie and Alex followed a small creek uphill and turned northwest roughly half a mile south of Saddle Junction. "That's where we saw him last," Connie Davis later wrote in a letter to the PCT community. "It was at about 8,080 feet on the afternoon of May 3rd. That was the last time Donovan was seen alive." 12 days passed before anyone realized he was missing. Many hikers believed that Donovan headed toward Fuller Ridge and then froze to death in the blizzard on San Jacinto's west side, near Saddle Junction. On Memorial Day weekend, 2005, Riverside County Rescue Unit personnel combed the area with dogs. After 2 days, with no clues, the authorities called off the search for good. After leaving the Davises on May 3rd, he tried to detour west. But with no way to navigate, he became disoriented. In a journal written in the margins of photocopied guidebook pages, Donovan scribbled, "Couldn't find the trail to Idlewild." So instead he cut away from Idlewild, drawn by the lights of much larger Palm Springs. Traveling about 3 miles northeast from the Saddle Junction area that night, he crossed Skinny Willow Creek, then climbed a small ridge and plunged down into a steep gash called Hidden Valley. Donovan's journal places him in Long Valley at about 4,300 feet, the night of May 3rd. On May 5th, still camped in the same ravine, he took a fall. How badly he was hurt is unclear, as Donovan didn't write detailed notes. He wrote that he had already become too weak to climb up out of the canyon. He tried to signal for help and built a few weak fires that quickly smoldered out, but no one saw him. A 100-foot waterfall lay directly below, and the canyon's walls were virtually sheer. He was boxed in, and he likely knew that it would be days, maybe a week or more, before anyone noticed he was missing. At one point on May 5th, Donovan took an inventory of his supplies. he was down to 12 cheese crackers. In his last entry, dated May 14th, he scribbled that he was going down to Long Creek for water. "Goodbye and love you all," he wrote. Donovan's remains were discovered by a 20-foot waterfall, in a pool set amid birches and mossy green rocks in May 2006. Now, though, in the swirling snow on San Jacinto, no one was there to help Donovan, and his destiny seemed plain. Here was a willful and defiant man who'd taken chances in the outdoors one time too many. Surely the mountain would snuff him out, scattering his generous spirit to the wind, and yet his story somehow transcends that inexorable logic. Even when the mountain was done with him, Donovan's mission seemed to gain a sort of afterlife, an ability to carry on when he couldn't. Indeed, in getting lost and facing his darkest nightmare, a solitary death, he would be doing the best thing he possibly could for two people he would never meet. Brandon Day, 28, and Gina Allen, 24, of Dallas, were found in May 2006, spending 3 nights in the San Jacinto wilderness. The third night, they came across a backpack of supplies at a deserted campsite. The remains were found near the camp. Day and Allen were visiting the desert east of Los Angeles for a convention when they wandered off a mountain trail during a 2-hour stop with other tourists. Prepared for a brief hike, they wore light windbreakers and tennis shoes and had no food, spare clothing, or cell phones. At first, they were not too worried because they could hear voices. "I still felt we were relatively close," Day said, recalling that he thought the trail would be around this next boulder. With night closing in, they took shelter in a small cave between boulders and spent the night sleepless, freezing, and hungry. In the morning, they struggled to follow a stream downhill through boulder-strewn terrain. They decided to keep going with the mantra from night one, "We're going to get out of here. We're not going to die. It's not our time," Day said. The couple found items that Donovan had left behind in a dead-end gorge on Monday, May 8, 2016. They included a warm sweater, foam sleeping mat, poncho, backpack, disposable razor, spoon, dry socks, and matches that the couple used to light a signal fire. Day and Allen were elated, thinking someone there could help them find the way out. But something was wrong. The gear was wet. A radio and flashlight were corroded. They realized the place was deserted. They found identification showing the pack belonged to Donovan, who had vanished a year earlier. "His last journal entry was 1 year ago to the day that we found it, which was very eerie," Day said. "Nobody knew where he was, nobody knew to come looking for him, so he was preparing for the end. We were looking at the words of a man who was passing. They were rescued after the flames from the fire were seen from a helicopter. The whole acre or two caught fire, created a really big smoke signal that finally alerted a helicopter crew. Even in his death, he was helping people," Donovan's longtime friend Chris Hook of Richmond, Virginia, said at the time. The couple said they had a real special thanks for Donovan. To those who didn't know him, Donovan often seemed gruff and ill-mannered. He swore like a sailor and burst into laughter at awkward moments. He never married or even dated, and though he had earned a decent salary before retiring from his job as a social worker, Donovan believed his mission in life was to help others, and he forswore many of the niceties of modern culture to focus on that effort. At Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia, where he'd often supervised dual diagnosis patients who were in wheelchairs and mentally ill, Donovan had orchestrated novel field trips. He'd take them to city parks or hunt down free theater tickets and drive them to the plays. He'd lug these patients around all by himself, says Sharon Loving, another social worker at Central. He'd lift them into the hospital van one by one. Standing atop a hill after a long and grueling hike, it's easy to feel invincible. You've pushed yourself to your limits and survived nature's sometimes unpredictable conditions. Turns out, even the most trail-hardened can be caught unprepared and make simple beginner mistakes. Don't underestimate the trial. This one is more common among beginners, but it can have disastrous consequences for anyone. Be honest with yourself. While a solo hike in itself isn't automatically dangerous, the most common mistake made by experienced hikers is taking off alone without notifying anyone. Be sure to tell someone where you're going and when you plan to be back. Even if you've hiked these woods 1,000 times, are a licensed cartographer, and were born on this very trail, a hiking trip is one time when it might be best to take the road more traveled. Though many hikers safely practice off-trail hiking, Most acknowledge the added dangers that come with it, as well as the specific preparation required to stray from the beaten path. Unless you're prepared to hike off trail, it can be a pretty reliable way to get lost or injured, or both. While turning back before you reach the end of the trail can be frustrating, it beats having to make camp unexpectedly. Hikers set turnaround times for a reason, and you don't want to be caught unprepared as the sun goes down. Keep an eye on your watch and determine when you'll need to begin heading back to safely reach your car or campsite. Helpful tips to avoid an outdoor disaster.